Okay, well, listen, we've got 8 minutes past 6, so let's make a start. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this this workshop. So we're in the Whiteness and Race Equality Network and Sport event, and it's obviously part of the Black History Month, and nearly at the end of October. So so this has been a good chance to reflect on what the month's meant to everyone this year, particularly in the light of maybe things happening outside the game this year, more so than others. And we're going to be looking at coach education, making black coaches and mental health. So the intersection of coach education and the grassroots game and the professional game, what does that look like? And mental health. So the aim is really to discuss the changes needed in coach education and the race competencies to empower black and Asian coaches to be represented in senior coaching positions. You'll all hopefully have seen the governance code that was launched this week by the FA. So maybe people have got some thoughts on that if you've had a chance to dig deep into it. So we can discuss that, hopefully we'll have some time at the end. And we'll also discuss the legal and structural changes needed to address race injustice in employment and coaching and management. Again, big topic. Whether we cover all of that, I don't know, but hopefully we'll touch on some aspects of it. And finally, to discuss the safeguarding changes needed to support the mental health of black and Asian coaches during the period of COVID. So very topical. For those of you who don't know, my name's Ifem Onuora. I'm the Regional Coach Education and Equality and Development Manager for the Professional Footballers Association. I'm going to be starting off the evening with a short presentation. So hopefully I can talk around a bit of my background, not for too long, but introduction to me and my background and my role at the PFA. And then we'll get into the real quality speakers, talking about from Colin King, who I'm sure you'll all know, talking about the changes in coach education and some of the legal structures. And maybe we're talking there about the senior end of football, pro level. And Pete Augustine, I'm sure you'll all know, challenges in the grassroots game, and they're varied and very many, so it'll be great to get an insight from Pete. Then Dr. Bennett, my esteemed and newly qualified colleague in the PFA, you're talking about sport and mental health. Congratulations to Michael. He's really earned his stripes over the last few years working in that wellbeing department of the PFA. And then last but very much not least, Gary Lewis. Gary Lewis has got a massive background in football. I won't steal his thunder, but massive background in football. And he can talk about that intersection of black coaches and the risk of health. Again, very topical with COVID. So if you haven't got any questions at this early stage, guys, I might crack on and do a short presentation, hopefully tell you a little bit about my role at the PFA and where I'm at. So hopefully you can see my screen in a moment. It's right at the top, isn't it? It has to be right there in the way of everything. There it is. Sure you're all used to Zoom calls nowadays and the things that can go wrong and can go right. Probably ask you all to mute if you haven't already muted your mics, but I will give time, if not at the end, certainly as we go along, for some questions, anything that pops up. So hopefully you can see that. We're discussing, obviously that's the workshop. Black History Month is coach education white. There's a screen to look at. I've actually nicked this, I think, off Colin, so thank you, Colin, or apologies, I've nicked it off you. You might be seeing this again. And really that's just a visual of the FA staff over the years. You'll see the current technical director, John, oh God, I've forgotten his name, from Tottenham. And I know him, I've known John many years. He'll come back to me. Howard Wilkinson, I'm sure you'll know, Les Reed, John McDermott, thank you. God, don't tell him that. Dan Ashworth, who presided over successful period teams and certainly the junior teams before he left for Brighton. And then you've got Charles Hughes, I think that is, and one other, is that Robin Russell? I can't remember. I'm not as old as some people on this call, but I think the visual there really just encapsulates. And by the way, like I said, I know John, known him a long time. No Dan, don't know Howard Wilkinson. Obviously know of him, and these have been very successful people in the role. But I think, and I guess what we're touching on tonight is how their positions have come to be almost the domain of coach educators, or certainly in Les Reed's case and Howard Wilkins' case, came from the professional game into coach education, then headed up the FA. And it's just a reflection of that age-old problem with the FA not reflecting the demographics of people who play the game. And that's at all levels, grassroots, and obviously England teams. You might have seen the England team of the under-21s recently, predominantly black players involved, and very few reflecting that on the outside. And I spent some time with the under-21s for 18 months. I know Eddie Boothroyd well, I count him as a friend. And again, I was probably the first of the black staff that they'd had. I think Terry Connor's been in there, Michael Johnson since, and Sol Campbell. But it just shows that challenge, that demographic off the pitch in the higher echelons of the FA, haven't always reflected the demographics on the pitch. But here we go, here's another demographic which is quite helpful to maybe reflect some change in faces. Now, I'll put Paul Davis at the top, rightly so. Hopefully you'll all know Paul. Works with the FA now, but he actually cut his teeth for many years with the PFA. And I think Paul's great gift and challenge and opportunity that he took and realised on behalf of many black coaches was to encourage them to go and get the badges. Paul was at the early vanguard of the coaching education at the PFA. And I think some of the accusations previously that black players weren't interested in the badges. Now, I would contest that very vehemently, but rather than contest it and not have your badge, let's get the badges done. And then there's no question then that they're ready to step up and take these jobs. So Paul did a great job of mobilising a lot of black coaches of his era to go and get the badges, and we've kept database now. I mean, there's an awful lot of managers and coaches in the system from a black background who are qualified A license and pro license. I'm underneath, obviously I came after Paul and hopefully carried on the work. We've got Gifton, who's currently there, and Mark Jules are there as well. Chris Fairclough is there, and Darren Moore is interesting to remember. Many of you might not know, Darren was actually with us for about a year before we went back to West Brom. We still speak to Darren, been a friend for a long time. So he's very supportive of the initiatives, and we try to utilise him at Doncaster Rovers now as well. So that's maybe a reflection that the PFA certainly are trying to diversify, and have certainly tried to diversify the coaching department in the union. So there's 4 of us currently working out of a coaching department of 13 coaches. So that's not a bad ratio and more reflective of the game. And long may it continue. There's a little bit of an overview. I won't read everything there, but I think if you look at the times there, 1993 right up to 2020, there's been a lot gone on there in terms of, I guess, black players' experience and how PFA played a part of that right at the beginning, helping launch Kick It Out, which went and show racing the red cart, and the Black Coaches Forum now, which interestingly is now being resurrected 17 years later. They're the early pioneers, the Sel Regises, the Luther Bliss, John Barnes. Interesting now, and I'd say probably, obviously, God rest his soul, Cyril's no longer with us, but also the others, only Chris is really working in the game to any extent now, doing a great job at technical director down at QPR. But that's systematic of that era of players who had distinguished playing careers, but weren't able to replicate that off the pitch. So again, some of our work there, I've highlighted that with Paul Davis, getting players onto the pro license. Vicky Hill, another great player of his era, introducing the Rooney Rule concept back in 2006. I was sat around the table when he talked about that. It just started in the States for the NFL. And then it took us another 10 years from that occasion, 2006, to get it operable in the EFL in 2016. And in between, we got coach educators, like you've said. We made sure we kept the database of coaches ready, and a ready list of coaches able to work. Worked on interview skills and job applications, all those things that we needed to do to make them ready to be employable. And then, like I said, 2015-16, we got the recruitment code, which I think it's fair to say hasn't been a resounding success. unlike the governance code, bringing it right up to date today, which seems to have some structures around it. Unfortunately, the recruitment code was never similarly structured. So there's nothing about good practice, monitoring data, which are all the things I've heard over the last few days from the governance code, which is giving me great heart, because that's the key to these things. It's one thing having a structure in place, but it's not supported. It just becomes a tick box exercise. So I think that's just a quick overview of what's been going on from our perspective as in PFA, trying to be big part of that vanguard to increase the black presence off the pitch in the technical area and beyond. And some of that synchronized with where coaching and the equalities department. So I work across both departments, and it just, I mean, I won't go through all of those, but all those headlines have been through this year, but it's been a bit of a tumultuous year, 2020. And all those headlines you can see on the PFA website, and some of them have gone off in the Daily Mail right in the corner, have been a response to incidents in football, the influence of social media, and then our drive. I think sometimes people want a lot out of the PFA. There's only so much we can actually deliver. I don't mean that as a cop-out. There are always things we can do better, but in the end, we're pressure group as much as anything. We're not the decision makers. So all we can do is, like you'd see on some of these slides, call for government inquiry into racism. That's interesting. That was actually at the end of last year, before all the tumult of this year, we'd call for that. And it's just trying to put pressure on the government stakeholders, the government in the form of the Ofcom, and to get pressure on social media companies. We've done a study there at the bottom, looked at the online abuse, and we're trying to get it's really trying to make an impact across the football landscape, both in commentary there, some racial bias stats, and obviously looking for that diversity issue. How do we get more black players becoming black coaches and managers? That's always, I always throw out that if anyone's unsure where we are now, 2016 stat was 4% of all senior coaching positions were black and Asian coaches. And when they said senior, that was head coach, assistant first team, under 18 to under 21, academy manager and head of coaching. So if you think the manager's position itself is volatile, and that could fluctuate, well, I think when you extrapolate over those 6 or 7 other job titles and over the 92 clubs, that's probably a more damning statistic. So that's where we are. And there's some examples of my work, working with players. So this is a young man who you might have heard of, Theo Walcott, doing a course with him in the COVID era. We're doing a lot of these one-to-ones. There's Theo with some of the Everton players, and Danny Rose has jumped in on a course as well that we're running. So we're having to adapt in these changing times. There's me in the top hand corner doing a lot of the media now, which has been a point of 2020 a little bit. This one at the bottom is an interesting one. We had some players who were raising some issues and concerns, and we always seem to be fighting off issues and concerns from black players and some of them current players, and where do they go from here, and some criticisms of the PFA, interestingly enough, which, you know, we've got to take on board some of them, but obviously manage expectations. There's something, I'm just getting to the last 2 or 3 slides. I'm conscious of time a little bit. I've nicked these couple of slides for my brother, who's an academic in Liverpool, just done his doctorate. He's just did a presentation the other night looking at black leader perspectives, which makes an interesting read. So his research is showing that black leaders committed to different style of leadership perhaps than white leaders, understanding that they're almost representing their communities, maybe to a greater degree than white players, and understand that the question of whether they succeed or failure is much harsher. It's shown in a harsher spotlight. So it's just an interesting one to throw off. And what do aspiring black leaders aspire to? Well, they're highly motivated, focused on solutions and ways forward. And a lot of this is garnered from a lifetime, I think, of being the underdog, basically, being a minority, being under, always trying to fight for your little place, and if you aspire to lead, and again we always talk about the lack of visible black leaders, not just in the game but throughout society. These are things, the motivators to lead, demonstrating role models to the community, demonstrating role models to those who come behind. That's a massive part of the black leader perspective. So I just thought it was worth showing. There's my last one. I've left that on the screen for you to read. That it's a Coach Carter quote I quite like using. And again, it's just a follow-on from the previous slides, really. What motivates people in leadership positions to go out and try and drive things forward? It's an innate, I think, desire to be better than what you are. And I like the All Blocks motto, to leave the shirt in a better place. It's almost something like that, I think, which is innate to the black community. Trying to make yourself shine to next generations that follow in behind. So always, I think there's always that element of leading to represent the next generation. I think that's very innate in everybody, perhaps, but I think even more so in the black community. And that's a really quick snapshot of my perspective from football and 30 years in the game as a coach, player, and really, as I guess I see myself now as very much a mentor. Right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Are there any questions or anything you want to put in the chat? Anything? I'm conscious we've got other speakers, so if you did want to leave it until at the end, you're more than welcome to. But I'll just stop that slide so I can come off there. Are there any other questions? I'll just give people a minute to maybe put something in the chat if they wanted to. We're going to go straight on to Colin. Colin, are you around? If you're ready to go on, or if not, it might be Pete. Put you on the spot there, Pete. If Colin's not quite ready, I'll give Colin another minute and just check whether there's any questions in the chat.
I don't think Colin's presenting today, no?
No? Okay.
I think it's to Pete.
Well, everyone can hear me because I've seen that in the chat. So I'll tell you what I'll do then. If Colin's not doing anything, I'm going to put Peter on the spot. If you're okay, Pete, to go straight into your little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
I'll hand
cool.
over to Peter Gustin.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Nice to be here with you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just can't see you.
Oh, right. Have I gone?
Yeah.
What's happened there?
I can see your finger.
Oh, there we go. I'm really good at this technology. Honestly, I really am, yeah. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for coming on tonight. I'm my current role, I'm part of a new setup at the FA. I'm a coach development officer. My role is around the idea of working with Black and Asian coaches. So it's diversity and inclusion is my title, diversity and inclusion CDO. And the idea is to help and support primarily Black and Asian coaches using new methods of developing coaches, i.e. through things like digital means, and not forgetting face-to-face, obviously, but our first port of call would be a digital offer, which hopefully will enable more people to access the services that we're going to provide. But obviously that's yet to be seen from a point of view of how things go. We're in this COVID age now, and digital has been the way that we've been engaging with coaches recently and at the start of this journey. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit was this idea of what where have we come from in coach education from a grassroots perspective. And I've got a little bit of, presentation, so I'm going to share this with you, share my screen with you. Screen. Okay, start. Here we go. Okay. can you all see my screen? Somebody could just give me a little bit of a hello. Yes, they can see my screen. Okay, I'm going to take it that you can. This is a photo taken.
Sorry, Pete. We couldn't. Now we can't.
Can you see my screen?
I can't.
No, I can't. Just a blank screen.
No, let me try again. It ended apparently. Okay, let's try again. So screen. Start broadcast. Can you see it now?
Yes,
I'm sharing now.
We've lost you again.
It keeps some reason. Okay. Anyway, what I'll do is I'll talk you through. First of all, when I started out as a coach educator, it started out. I was lucky enough to be on a scheme that was started by Colin King, where I think it was about 18 of us, probably a bit more, went to Bisham Abbey. And it started off that we were going to try and get for our A license. And at the time, and that was back in 2005, I believe there were very few black coaches from the grassroots game that had their A license. And there were very few from the professional game also at the time who had their A license. So the idea that Colin, I believe, had was to start developing coaches, black and Asian coaches, and he had some female coaches on the course as well, to take them into that level where you could have your B license, go into your A license, then become a coach educator, to start this idea of having more diversity around coach education. That then led into all the different things that we then had to encounter. There was a 5-step process that you had to go through. You had to go and watch somebody coach, and then you had to work with them for a little bit, yada, yada, yada. And then eventually you were signed off as a coach educator. But a piece that is interesting and something that I've spoken about to Colin and other coach educators in the past is, how are we as coach educators, where do we get our sense of self from? Are we a product of a society, or if you like, an education system that promotes certain values, and those values may not be ours? Do we wear a mask? Yeah. Do we have to wear a mask as a coach educator, as a black coach educator, to be able to fit into the system? And this is often a difficulty which, you know, we have to deal with. Why? Because the system is still, we are still a minority in the system. Because we're a minority in the system, we have to be very careful how we act, how we speak, what we say at certain times. I had a conversation with one of my colleagues, a white colleague, and we were talking about how we have to behave. And a quote from him was, and I said to him, we talk about blackness all the time, but we never talk about whiteness. And he said to me, well, why do we have to talk about whiteness? And I said, because if we're going to talk about blackness, we have to talk about whiteness. And the reason why we have to do that is because to understand the black experience, we also have to understand the white experience. How do white males feel when they are in positions of power? How do they view everybody else? How do they view women? How do they view black males? How do they view black females? And he said to me, well, I don't have to think about being white because everything stacks in my favor, which I thought was actually quite an honest statement from him. He said, I never have to think about, when I go into an interview, whether I'm not going to get the job because of my color. I know that if I don't get the job, I don't get it because of my color. I haven't not got the job because of my color. I've got it because somebody's better than me, or somebody knows somebody that I don't know. But I can then go into another job and still don't have to think about that. So when we have those honest conversations, what we then are able to do, we're now able to unpick what does coach education look like now for people who are on courses. So women, black men, Asian women, what does that look like for them when they're on a course? And they have to then go through the minefield of what's going to be presented to them on a course. It's very important, I feel, that when we have coach educators, that they need to be diverse, because then we have diverse thinking. We look at things differently. There's this the term about cognitive diversity, which is being bandied about quite a bit now. And I kind of didn't really understand what that meant, but just recently I've really found out what it meant. That ability to think slightly differently from someone else, that ability to see things differently. When we look at a coaching session, say, for example, that's been done by a young black male who has to work in a third of an AstroTurf, and they've got 30 kids, and part of their problem is crowd control. And the way they have to speak to the kids, or the way they have to enact with the kids to gain control, is different to somebody who is in a nice leafy suburb of Surrey, who's got a whole AstroTurf and maybe 16 kids. It's different. So what does that look like? And what competencies does that coach who works in, say, Brixton or St Paul's in Bristol or in the middle of Birmingham, what competencies do they show that enable them to coach kids or adults in a very challenging environment? And if we don't have that cognitive diversity, what happens is there are assumptions made about the people who are on the course. And I think that's something that we have to look at. We have to look at what competencies there are now for learners coming from different backgrounds, and how do we ensure that those learners aren't made to feel any less than anyone else who's comes from a much more, if you like, affluent background, or maybe not even that affluent, just a background where everything is stacked for them. I think we have to think about how we allow empowerment to happen for coaches, and how we mustn't make people feel that when they come into a coaching course that they are any lesser than the person who's standing at the front of the course. Because every person who comes into a course has a set of skills that they use to navigate their world in everyday life. Those set of skills can also be used in coaching, and we mustn't ignore those, because if we do, again, we're missing a trick of who might be our better coaches. I think finally, for me, the last thing I think that we should be looking at is, we have the PFA, obviously, we have the FA, we have the Premier League, we have coach education in pockets in all these organisations. I think it's really, really important that we speak more, we connect, especially in the space around Black and Asian coaches, and start to see where are the similarities where we can help each other to ensure that coaches can move up and down the levels, because there are some very, very good grassroots coaches who can make that step into professional football, and many of them do. There are some very good coaches in the professional game who sometimes may need a bit of experience, or can't get a job in the Football League, and may need to think about maybe dropping into the conference or whatever it is. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way it should be, but you know, and I'm going to talk it from a Black experience. Sometimes we just need the experience. We just need somebody to open the door for us, to let us in, so that we can actually start to coach and to manage, and then start to find a way to find ourselves within the football world. And I think some of that might be around some legal frameworks, not looking at the idea of voluntary codes, but mandatory codes. I mean, people have often said, oh, you can't have mandatory codes because people will pay lip service to it. But, we've had voluntary codes for years and they haven't always worked. So what's the next step? And I put it to you that it may be that we might need to go down the mandatory road, possibly. So that's me. So who do we go to next? Is it Mr. Bennett?
I believe it is, mate. I believe it is.
Just before we go to Michael, thanks for that, Pete. Some great things there. Just for you guys who are listening, want to store up all your questions, but great to build up on some of the things I was talking about there, Pete, in terms of the grassroots experience and how coach educators, how they look and make a massive difference, and that diversity of coach educator, which is what I started to talk about and Paul Davis started to introduce into the pro game, and that hopefully we're trying to take on a bit more. So well done, thanks for that. And like I say, keep all your questions coming, guys. And before I hand over to my esteemed colleague, Michael.
Cheers, Ify. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me? So
yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. So good evening. Thanks, Colin, for kind of putting this together. Thanks, Ify, for kind of leading this, and Gary and Pete for taking part, and Matt for obviously in the background doing my presentation for me, because I had a bit of a nightmare trying to get this sorted. So I think for me, I want to kind of carry on from where kind of Pete left off, really. And mine's looking at the kind of experiences that coaches, Black and Asian coaches, kind of experience on their journey more than anything else. I think for me, the key for me was is looking at and wanted to talk about the kind of lived experience of what coaches, go through and experience around kind of race and mental health. I think this is an area that I believe is a topical area that needs to kind of be looked into and investigated more. I think it kind of comes off of the back of my own research into understanding the lived experience of mental health with English professional footballers, and trying to get to an understanding of, we talk about mental health, we talk about, well-being, and we use the words, anxiety, depression and stress as these kind of mental health words, but they are symptoms of something. You don't become stressed overnight, you don't get anxiety overnight, you don't get depression overnight. Something kind of it implements that and causes that to happen. So it's trying to get to the root of that. So I think for me, from a coaching perspective, we're looking at your lived experience of your coaching journey and what that's been like. So they're the things I'm going to kind of look at today, this evening. First thing that comes to mind is, on your coaching journey, how has this impacted you? Race, in your journey as a coach. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with the issues that you encounter? Where do you go to get support with these issues? Do you get support for these issues? Because I know that there's a lot of issues that you may be encountering regarding the coaching journey. It's not straightforward, as Pete says. Being a Black coach is difficult. He talked about a colleague that recognises the privileges that they have, and what's it like for you as an individual trying to get into this coaching realm, trying to walk this coaching pathway. And this is, I think, for me, this is an area that we're not talking about, and I want to kind of pose questions and look at this and look at talking about it and looking at the lived experience of coaches that have gone through this experience. I think, as you can see to the right of the screen, I recently did a paper behind the mask, demedicalising race and mental health. And the idea about that for me was talking about, let me just talk about my football career quickly. I think when we talk about the mask, it was played a very significant part in my research for my PhD. And one of the subordinate themes was the mask, and about how players put on a mask to, one, hide feelings, hide fears, hide worries, but it also became a barrier to players actually coming forward and wanting to seek support. And from my standpoint, being I recognised that I had a mask at a later stage in my career, but realised that my mask kind of was on from the time I was basically in a 16-year-old going into the professional game, and basically recognising that I got in as a 16-year-old, not knowing anything about professional football, and was thrust into this environment where you're playing youth team football with your mates in the youth team for a year, and then the transition from the youth team into the first team at 17, in the first team change with the first team players that you were cleaning boots the year before. It was a massive bit of pressure for me, and for me, I couldn't be myself. I had to be I had to use the word man up. I had to man up in that environment, and that was quite difficult. And that was me wearing my mask. And I felt that the more I was in this environment, the more I had to put a mask on, because I couldn't be myself. I couldn't be open. I couldn't, talk openly around my fears and concerns, because you just don't do that in football. And we're talking the late 90s, early 90s, throughout the 90s really. So for me, that was my mask. My mask was, trying to fit in, trying to get managers to like you, trying to get coaches to like you, so you play week in, week out to get a decent contract, look after your family. Those are the kind of masks that I had to put on in football. So, for me, today is around just touching or scraping the iceberg of what it looks like for coaches, black coaches, Asian coaches, in around their mask and what their mask look like and what does that entail. Next slide, please, Matt. Right, so here we've got just a few pictures. I've put a few pictures up here. You'll see Justin Fashioner recently, it's 30 years since he's passed away. You've got the young boy Jeremy there, who recently passed away from Man City. You've got Dane Atkinson, whose life was taken. John Gittins, who passed away, and we've got obviously Hope Powell, who for me kind of trailblazed in the black women's coaches. And you've got this young woman at the bottom called Annie Zadia, who's just trying to get into the game, make their way into the game. And these are just a few pictures of, different journeys and different issues that individuals have come into contact with. In the bottom picture, you've got a picture that we took, Colin King and Wallace Hermit kind of put together down in Brixton there, our Black Archives, where we came together and discussed, again, around the importance of, black lives and coaching and football, and how, we need to make an impact in that. But also what I put inside of this is just some issues you may encounter. So you who are listening, have a look at these questions, or these little questions that have been posed, just some of the issues you may have encountered in football. The stress of playing, we know about the stress of playing, those who play the game. The pressures of coaching. I haven't coached, I'm a UEFA coach, but realised from a very young age in my coaching pathway that coaching wasn't for me. I just didn't have the patience. And so, moved away from that, but how do you as coaches deal with the rejection, deal with the exclusion, because we know that's there, how do you deal with that from an emotional standpoint, well-being standpoint, and also dealing with a stereotype, that's massive as well. So I think for me today, as I said before, it's just about trying to pose some questions and for you to start to kind of having a think about what does that look like for you as individuals, and what impact that's played in your kind of coaching journey. Next slide, please, Matt. So this is an interesting one. So to the right, to the left, you'll see my esteemed friend. If you try and work that out, you probably know it was Dr. Colin King. And me and him have a chat about the mask a lot, and we realise that the mask, does play a massive part in the individual's process and Black and Asian coaches' processes. And I think well, the answer for me is that do we know we're wearing a mask first and foremost? Do we know we're wearing a mask? What does that mask look like? How do we remove the mask? Do we want to remove the mask? These are the questions that we want to pose to individuals, because we know that we in order to get on this coaching journey, as Pete kind of alluded to, it's difficult, and sometimes and I'm going to stop talking now, because I think this video will showcase a bit what I'm trying to say. So if you just click on the video, please, Matt. Let's hope it works.
That mask, I'd been used to putting that on for many, many years as a player, particularly in the early years where I would have been the only black player in the team, particularly the late 70s, early 80s, and even sort of going through that early part of the 80s, only one of probably 2 or 3 black players in the team. And of course, I think everybody's aware of what, as a black player, that you went through in them years, and for quite some years, is that you perhaps got used to that. You got used to that mask. You got used to making sure that obviously saying what you had to say at the right times, but in the majority of times making sure that people didn't see how much it hurt. What people saw was somebody that was wanted to prove a point, wanted to make sure they got the very best out of what they were doing, and I can relate that very much to showing that mask or having that mask as a manager and as a coach now. And on numerous occasions, what we will have to do is say something that we don't particularly feel. But ultimately, it's about getting the best out of the role that you're in and the best out of the job that you're doing.
That's Chrissy Houghton, as you all know, fantastic man, fantastic coach, and fantastic football career and coaching career now, coaching Nottingham Forest. And I'm just, why I showed that was because here is a man who's been very, very successful in his coaching, playing career and his coaching career, but talks about him having to wear a mask himself in particular times of his career or all through his career. And you're just wondering if he's having to wear a mask through those journeys. What is it like for grassroots coaches starting into the game? What is it like for grassroots coaches in the game? What is it like for coaches that are trying to get to professional game? What is it like for coaches that are in a professional game and not getting opportunities? What is that like? And so it's all I'm trying to do today is just to pose questions to get you just to think about your own personal journey and what that looks like and what that mask might entail and look like, and try to have a think about where to go with that. Next slide, please, Matt. So this is a coach education social and psychological corner, and all coaches know about the social and psychological corner. And for me, in the first column, it's like in the chat box that we've got here. Just list some of the social issues that affect your well-being in coaching. So just list one or two that impacts you. So for instance, paying for the course. People don't realise that paying for the course, is a big hindrance for some individuals. Making money to pay for a course, that can be a real hindrance on people's well-being and for coaching. Being assessed, I know from that, when I saw that, I was like, do you know what? I remember doing my being assessed when I was at my UFB, and all your peers watching you, and some of them are participating, and some of them on the side are watching, but it feels like the whole world is watching your actual coaching session, and that feels like pressure as well. So what was that like? What well-being issues does that bring on for you? Racist remarks. We realise that racism, they say this, raise yourself again. I don't think it's ever gone away personally, but it's coming again. What was that like for you? Did you experience that? How did that impact your socially? How did that impact your well-being as a coach? So there are examples. On the other side, you've got how has it affected you psychologically and emotionally? Is it causing you to hide in your mask? Is it causing you to deny anger? So all I wanted to do is just try and get from you, those out there listening, just to pose or put in what you feel, what you experienced in your own coaching journey, whether it be short or long, what you experienced and how that's impacted you. Next slide, please, Matt. And just moving on quickly, obviously for me and PFA research, what I realised when I was doing my research was that, I was looking at the lived experience of players, and there wasn't any much literature around the lived experience of English players with mental health issues. And there was a review of 3,000, and most of them were biomedical models, most of them were categorising medical models. And for me, what I wanted to do and what I want to do with the research I've done is move it from a service-led approach, which is me trying to implement a service that I think the players will want to have and want to use and stuff, and moving that to a needs-led approach where we're now asking the players what is it they want, what is it they will require to access support for their well-being and mental health, and that might be a question we need to pose with coaches. What does that look like? What would you like as coaches to be able to access support for well-being and support for mental health? So that was one part of the study. The other study was that there are no studies from the grassroots. We've all come from grassroots. We've all come through the grassroots program to get to where we are today. And some people have gone from the grassroots to the professional game and gone back to the grassroots, but there's no studies that they're looking at the Black and Asian perspective around grassroots and coaching and their mental health and well-being. So that's something we need to look at. And maybe an audit of the professional clubs and a specific personal support for Black and Asian coaches in the communities. So, these are something that I'm maybe looking at, possibly researching off the back of my own research. I think the two things that came from my research were, future research was looking at the women's game and the lived experience of mental health in women's game, because I think their experience is completely different to the men's game, and a load of different issues that they encounter. So that's something I would like to look at. And obviously the second part would be looking at the Black players, the Black and Asian players, and the impact of what the racism can have and has had on them and their mental health and well-being, and how that's impacted them. So they're the two areas that I'm looking to do for future researching. Last slide, please, Matt. And lastly, way forward. taking a knee for change, and I know Bengal's taking a knee in a game, which is great. I think for me, it's just I've got to minimise my screen because I can't see that over there. So research for me moving forward would be like looking at research into mental health about the grassroots around mental health. Outcomes of the research from a social and cultural guidance to good welfare practices in the four corners of coach education to ensure the counties. Now the counties is a difficult one because obviously I work in the professional game, but this may be something to look at from a grassroots perspective to ensure counties with high representation of Black and Asian communities have a trained lived experience welfare officer. The professional game has a designated mental health welfare officer. I think we've got welfare officers at the club, but I think these welfare officers need to be upskilled with at least a module of some sort of welfare or counselling skills or something that could enable them to kind of engage with the individuals at their clubs. Something we can talk about further. And from the research to develop a Black Lives Matter guidance, mental health. So I think more so it's just from that to research has developed some sort of guidance and framework that will enable the Black and Asian coaches, Black and Asian players to feel more comfortable in coming forward in support of their mental health and well-being. And lastly, looking at COVID-19 and the impact this will have in the future. I think we're just seeing the early signs of it, but I think the impact later on down the line is going to be massive. And what impact that have on people's emotional well-being and coaches as well as players. So I think that leads lovely into Gary's presentation, but that is it for me. Any questions you want to pose, as I said, if he said, happy to do that at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Great insight there. And like you said, set it up lovely for Gary's session. Guys, I'm sure you'll have loads of thoughts around that one. Really interesting, even from my perspective, to listen to some of those mental health challenges in coach education, both as an educator and an educatee, some of those motivations or barriers to getting involved. So please, if you've got those questions, just keep them in check, and we'll hopefully get to them after. Gary, over to you. Last but very much not least. Thank you.
Thanks, Iffy. Can you see my screen on your screen?
Not quite yet, Gary.
So let me come on to this. Matt, I might need your help. I pressed on the shared screen, but my PowerPoint has come up, but it's not sharing.
No, we can't see it.
Just while we're dealing through the tech issues, has anyone got a burning question from what we've heard so far? Yourself or Michael or Pete? Anything you can throw in a question now before we resume with Gary? Don't have to wait till the end necessarily. Can I just throw one in then, just to Michael? Is that all right? Is he? I might have just caught him going for coffee.
No,
okay. Matt, you said you realised at an early age that coaching wasn't for you.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that? Do you want to just talk about that? Because that's interesting from my perspective.
Do you know what it was? If you obviously, I'm playing, you've gone into part-time football. You've been in the professional game for 10, 12 years. You've gone into the part-time football. I think I left professional game to go into part-time football to try and think about my next steps, chapter 2 of my life after football. And by playing semi-professional football, it gave me 2 or 3 days to try and, have a bit more space to be able to do different things. I wasn't sure what pathway to take. You ask senior people that for guidance, and they give you that guidance, like, you know what I mean? And the kind of guidance they gave me was maybe 15 years in the game, maybe coaching is a pathway for you. So I said, okay, no worries. And I kind of went on that coaching pathway, did my level 2. And then obviously did my level 3. I managed to jump from a level 2 to level 3 within 6 months, just because a space arose on a course at Southend in the community, and did the course. And obviously you're coaching with players that have played the game, and when you're coaching them, it's a bit easier when you're coaching players who know how to play the game. So that was fine, and I did that, and obviously then passed it, and then obviously then thought that I'd be going into this professional game where you'll be able to coach academy kids and go in there and show them what you can do. That wasn't the case. I ended up going into schools, doing after school club coaching, doing PE at lunchtime, and then you know what you realise, you've got the kids that don't want to be there, having to be there for PE, so you're not really going there to coach people properly. And I think because of that, I think, you know, patience-wise, that I did that for a year, and patience-wise, I just kind of lost the patience because of that. And I realised that, you know, I became more and more frustrated with, if you can't pass the ball 5 yards, then, you know, move out of the way and get me someone who can, sort of thing. Like, do you know what I mean? And that's not coaching. So I think that's when I realised for me that, you know, possibly an alternative pathway would be needed, and that's what I did, mate.
Oh, good. And I'd say very much that's babysitting by the sound of it, rather than coaching. So I can understand no one wants to spend that a career doing that. I think we're okay with the screen now, but just on that point, it might be one for Pete to take up as well, because obviously working in the grassroots game, how much of some of those familiar challenges where you are doing levels of working the levels of the game where perhaps you're more of a mentor rather than a guide of elite players. So maybe that's one to think about. Gary, are you okay to go?
I'm good to go. Can you see the screen okay?
Yeah, off you go.
At last, sorry. So thanks very much, everybody, for inviting me to come on anyway. Obviously, the angle I'm coming back is more of a medical perspective, and I've worked with Colin and Mickey for a long time on mental health issues in football, and been doing a lot of work with the PFA on this. But in the current environment, the current climate, it really takes these issues to a new level. And so regarding the COVID-19 outbreak that we're currently going through and the effects this has on the BAME community, it's well documented that there are issues with it, and the current data, which I'll go on to in a second, really highlights some of the issues in the BAME community, which then would express itself through you guys in coach education, coaching at all levels, particularly at grassroots level. Obviously, I come from London, and the FA counties in London, there are some that are most at risk, but as you're seeing around the country, it varies from area to area. So that needs to come into your consideration. But I think stage 3 and beyond is we've got to learn a lot of lessons from what's going on currently with COVID-19 and interlock them really and put them in with a lot of the great work you guys are doing in equality and diversity, education, and making people aware of what impact this might have in the BAME community in football education. That also goes from grassroots level to coaches, to players, to county staff and support staff. There are a lot of support staff out there that tend to get forgotten in this arena. And then hopefully to try and get the FA to produce some guidance on this to help you guys out. So some data is that black males are 4.2 times more likely to die from COVID. Black females are 3 times more likely than white male and females. Men of Bangladeshi and Pakistani origin are 3.6 times more likely to have COVID-19 related deaths. And so this goes on and on and on. I'm not going to read through, you can all read your screens. But in general, if we summarize it and brought it together, that communities from BAME backgrounds are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed. And then the resulting conditions that can come from a positive COVID-19. So I think this sort of data, it can scare you a little bit, but what I'd like to use this forum for is to educate the educators, to make you guys and people out there in the BAME community and women's game just aware of this data and how you need to really adapt what you're doing and working at all levels within football to make the people you're working with aware of these facts, because there are a lot of cultural reasons why these facts get ignored. There's political reasons why these facts are being ignored. And without going into them, because I just want to come from a medical background, that I think if we make this awareness, we put it out there more, and then we can spread the message more, it will make people more accountable for their actions and their habits and the things they're putting on within their working environment.
Gary, can I just come in there very quickly, because it might be a question that you'll come to later. that previous slide, is that overwhelming socioeconomic factors, or are they physiological?
Well, this is what they don't know, Colin, at the moment, and this is the problem with COVID-19, that you're learning every day when you turn the news on. These are unprecedented times, and we don't know. The point I'm trying to make to you guys is, we don't know the reasons behind it. Let's act on what we do know. Take much more. This awareness will make us take better precautions and better actions and be safer. But then afterwards, let's not ignore these facts and ask questions why. And that's when I think the social factors, the economic factors, the cultural factors, because that comes into it as well. Why would this be the case? And we need to learn so much from this, and then put it into protocols and things to stop the spread. And because this virus is not going away soon. This is going to be around for a while, and it's going to change. It has changed all our lives, and it's going to continue to change our lives. It's certainly going to change your coach education lives, because it's putting a lot of restrictions on what you can and can't do. I've recently just come off an APMIF, which is a medical training course for advanced first aid. And it has completely changed the course and how we work and how we interact with the candidates. And you guys are going to be the same. So I think it's so important that this comes into your own awareness and your own education, and then you spread the word, because the only way we're going to get on top of this pandemic is by people taking the right precautions and the right actions. So when you come into the FA counties, and now obviously Colin's given me some of this data, this is changing daily, as you can tell by the tier 2, tier 3 sort of things that are going on. And even within counties, you're going to get subsections in counties at this change. But again, I think this is where the cultural and the ethnic backgrounds of the areas that we're talking about will come into play. And I think as coach educators, I don't think there's anyone going to be more aware than you guys of how regionalized this can become and how this is. And again, if we are taking the message out into these regions where there are higher levels of BAME communities, we have to keep spreading the message again and again and again that you are at greater risk. You have to take precautions. It's not something you can hide from. I've been listening with great interest about the mask that Colin keeps referring to. I would ask you guys to question, is that mask also being used in this context to hide from these facts? Because if it is, it's detrimental to your own communities, because you have to be aware that you are at greater risk. And BAME coaches, support staff, players, kids, you are at greater risk. And I think we have to spread in the word that you have to take more precautions and be aware of these facts. And I'm going to whiz through some of these slides. And then once we get this education, this awareness steps up, we then need to translate that into educating the educators. So does this mean you guys have to change the way you're educating coaches? And I think there will be some parts of this that do need to change. We're changed tonight. We're on a webinar. We're not face to face. So it's changing our lives already. Do we need to make BAME tutors, coaches and communities aware of these facts? Do we need to be screaming for the rooftops with these facts? Can we do some research? Colin referred to doing future research in the women's game. I now work as a consultant with the Arsenal women's team, and Colin, I've got to reiterate, it's screaming out for research in the women's game. And I'm sure it's screaming out for research in your communities that you're working with day in and day out. I haven't even touched on mental health yet. And you could have your own webinar on that alone. And how is the current COVID-19 affecting mental health? You guys have already referred to the effects of mental health on BME coaches and the stresses they're put under, the masks they wear. Well, I'm now telling you from a medical point of view, you're at a higher risk of contacting COVID-19 or contracting COVID-19. What effect will that have on your mental health? It's another layer of the onion of all these things that are adding up. And until we start discussing it, until we bring it out in the open, we're not going to fully understand it, and we aren't going to get the help to people that really need it. So I think, I'd like to think this is going to be a stepping stone for future work, future research, future work for the FA, the PFA. And I'd like it to become almost protocols written on how the people can educate, can teach, can work across communities, where they can go for mental health support in all aspects of what we've spoken about tonight. The environment we're working in, whether it's dietary, whether it's health, whether it's communities, whether it's cultural. Because at the end of the game, we're all involved in a game that we passionately love. I'm in it from a medical point of view. A lot of you guys are in it from a coaching point of view. A lot of it are going to be in it from a playing point of view. And I use a phrase of football family. To me, the ethnic background makes no difference whatsoever. We are all from the same football family. And we've got to learn to support each other, educate each other, and work as a family. And I think that has come across evidently from all you guys tonight. It's really been quite powerful for me to listen to, that you're all very passionate from your own areas within education and coaching and football. And I think it can only be good for the game moving forward that we have more discussions like this, and we keep researching, we keep knocking on the door, and we keep asking the questions. So I'm going to get off my soapbox and pass it back to the group. And I'll pass it over to you, Ify, to take over.
Mute myself. Thank you, Gary. That was really, really interesting, particularly about some of those COVID challenges. You never tend to think. I think we just automatically get used to learning and teaching differently. But in terms of how it impacts on us and me, you know, I've got players and coaches wanting me to come out and assess them, saying, "Oh, it's all right. We've got a team. You can come. We've got a little bit of a protocol." Without actually realising that I'm at risk and I have to be really cautious. I've resisted saying yes right now, but I almost feel that pressure to go in and maybe take that chance, and that's what it feels like listening to yourself. So that's really, really interesting and impactful what you're saying there. So listen, we've got about just over 15 minutes, got about 20 minutes, I say. So it'd be great to get some questions from the chat. If anyone's there and has got some burning questions, this is your time. Got some esteemed professionals. Maybe I'll just start it off, and hopefully it won't just be me for 15 minutes. And hopefully everyone else can chip in. Just from your experience, Gary, and you know the experience you've had with Arsenal and England, have you come across? I don't mean between any confidences. Have you seen anything that that would be similar to this present environment which we're in, where I'm not talking about the big diseases, but something that has really challenged you and impacted from a medical point of view, a really challenging period of time, or because sometimes it's the outside of it. It might be either medical or environmental. Can you think of anything that's impacted football the way COVID has?
Definitely nothing like this. This is completely unprecedented. From a purely medical perspective and changing our protocols and our policies, I think probably the outbreak of AIDS and the implications that has to the game and the blood-borne diseases. So we changed the way we worked with cuts, wounds. I mean, I remember in the 80s when tennis players used to have blood transfusions to help them get through tennis matches. And that's probably the only thing I can think of that's actually, from a medical perspective, changed the way we work. Saying that, I must admit the work that's being done on mental health and mental health awareness I think it's changing things quite dramatically already, and it needs to go a lot further. But we're beginning to open doors. We're beginning to talk a lot more in the football family, and I think that can only be better for the game.
Good. And just on that, Michael, do you think we'll ever have enough resources? If you think about mental health as an iceberg, how much of a percentage is it visible, and how much is still underneath the surface? Would you say, without specific percentages, where do you think we are with that?
I think we've still got a long way to go with it. I think, as I said, if you look at the stats from 2016, we had 160 members use the service in 2016, and that was 70-30 former players. In 2017, that jumped to 403, and that jumped to 403 drastically because we had implemented the player welfare, mental health well-being workshops to the clubs, to the 18s and 23s and first team. And also we did our first mental health conference where we invited staff from clubs to come along and to listen to work that's been done, listen to work that's available for them to take back to their clubs and make their club and players aware of that too. And then you jump to 2018, which we had 438. And then that kind of went from 70% current players, 6% current players to 40% former players. So the tide kind of changed a little bit in regards to current players coming forward. In 2016, we then jumped to 658. And so the jumps got bigger because I think we got more people talking about mental health. Chris Kirkland's and the guys like Liam McKenzie and the guys like Carlada, former players, and you got the current players like Danny Rose and players talking about that, Gareth Southgate having these conversations with Peter Crouch and all these individuals. So we're talking more, and then obviously you've got the Heads Up campaign that's been implemented by the Prince William, and talk about Prince William being president of the FA and kind of implementing the importance of men to talking about the male suicide and stuff. So I think we're progressing, as Gary said, we're progressing. But if you look at the kind of the players that we're working with, which is 50,000 former members, and you got you can only have 3,000 current players, 1,500 scholars, and 200 women players. That's 4,700. You know what I mean? So if you look at that in the demographics of this whole country, the whole 64.5 million, it gives a bit of an idea. So we're making steps, but we've got ways to go, mate. Do you know what I mean? But the conversations, even having these now, showcases that it's moving in the right direction. So yeah, we're just progressing, mate. Small steps.
And it's a shame, isn't it? Because every tragedy, every significant event reignites that conversation. So the conversation is actually the good thing, but the event is the sad thing. And I'm thinking Man City recently, because that's ignited another question about, does the game cater for players enough, especially those young players? Are they robust enough? Do we set players up at too early an age that it's this one chance and then it's a cliff edge?
It's a difficult one, again, they're coming in the game younger and younger now. When you think about players that get released at 16 or get released at 18, people forget they might have been at clubs for 5, 6, 7 years before that, do you know what I mean? And you have to realise that every couple of years, they're trying to get a new contract. So if it's 12 to 14, you're trying to get a new contract, 40 to 60, you're trying to get a new contract. So it's constant pressure on these individuals. And for me, if you're dealing with constant pressure, particularly at a young age, you don't know what pressure is, you don't have to deal with it. Do you know what I mean? I think this is where the education needs to come in, that these individuals at this young age need to be able to understand that talking, it's fine to talk about the pressure that they're going through. It's fine to talk about what they're facing. It's fine to talk about being under stress or have anxiety. It's fine to talk about it. But my concern is that at that young age, are they able to articulate their feelings and emotions? So I think the key is going to be just continue to kind of sow that seed of support and about mental health and well-being to this younger generation, because they're going to be the future, and making it just normalize it as much as we can. So when they do get in the professional game, talking about mental health is just normal as talking about physical health.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. When I go into clubs and deal with 16 to 18-year-olds doing the level 2, it's the first thing they say. This is a 18-month, not 2 years. It's probably a year's trial.
Yes,
that's what you're on.
Yeah,
and now I'm conscious of that language, trial. it feels quite emotive, doesn't it? Now, when I come to think about it, should have put it in a different way. But I'm trying to give them a little idea of them being judged every day and to give themselves the best possible chance. But in hindsight, I'm thinking, is that too much, or I don't know.
It's a hard one, mate. It's a hard one. As I said, you've got when you realise you've got a cohort of maybe 20, 24 squad of 2024, and we know that the stats show 2, 3, or 4 of those people are going to probably go on. The fallout rate's massive. And if you think about the 91 league clubs and you think about the under 9s, 10s, all the way to 16s, and a number of players that are in that field, and also the women's game as well. You've got to mention the women's game as well, because that's growing as well. There's a large number of individuals that will fall out of the game, and because of they're not making a professional game, won't be able to access emotional support. And where do they go? That's the concern.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for that, Michael. There is a question from Simon in the chat, and apologies, Simon, I did see it come up a couple of minutes ago, but found myself talking again. So I think Simon's question is the information Gary gave in the slides being given to coaches? I don't really want to elaborate on that, Simon, because you mentioned the last slide. Is there something, maybe give you a moment to just elaborate on that? Because I think it's a good question from what I understand you to mean by it. If you can just give a bit more specific on that, that'll help me throw it open to the panelists. And just while you're doing that, just going back to Pete, in your role, Pete, at the FA, how do you see that? Is that front facing in terms of what your role looks out the FA, the picture it projects, or is it inward facing? You're doing a lot to educate and transform cultures within the organisation. You mute, Pete. Great stuff.
Keep doing that. It's kind of a bit of both, really. Your role, sometimes you are educating groups of people, your peers, at times, when you're talking about your lived experience, and they're also talking about their lived experience. But also, the role is as a coach development officer is that you're trying to empower the coaches who you come into contact with, and let them know that how good they are as coaches. I mean, today I was working with some female coaches, and it was really awe-inspiring what I saw. And I saw these coaches working. It was really, really brilliant. It was a female-only course, and they were amongst their peers, and they felt safe within that environment. And quite often, that safety isn't always there, or hasn't been there, should I say. There is some work being done around providing that safety, and some of the counties are doing some good work. And to be quite honest, the FA is doing some quite good work as well. So the point is, for me, for coaching and education, you need to feel safe within that environment. If you don't feel safe, then you're not going to learn. And that, again, going back to Michael's point about mental health, that also affects your mental health. I can remember going through my badges, and it was tough. It was not only a physical trial, but it was also a mental trial. Not being an ex-professional myself and being on an A license, and you're seeing ex-professionals on there, and thinking, well, if there's a quota, I'm not going to be one of those people in the quota because I'm not an ex-professional football player. So I now have to be 2 or 3 times better just to be the same. And then you've got other coaches. You see the way at the time some of the coach educators would be speaking to some of the other coaches, and you could see that there was a definite bias in favor of them. So my role is to try and, I feel, is to try and say, well, actually, let's even that out. Let's smooth that out a little bit. Let's make sure that I challenge myself at all times, how I work with coaches. Do I show any biases? And if I do, how do I challenge my own biases? How do I have an open environment where people feel safe in which to express themselves and to be able to do the things that they want to do, and not be told that's wrong or that's bad or this, that. It's that kind of that kind of work that we're doing when we're actually going out into the field and working with coaches. It's trying to have that safety net, that safe environment that the coaches can work in.
Yeah, I think you make a really important point there, Pete, and particularly picking up on the word safety, because I think that's what Simon's alluding to his question there, and Colin, in terms of how do we educate white coaches to understand the issues of experience of Asian coaches, and how do we support coaches? Are these made available to coaching staff through the PFA and FA? And I think it comes down to that safety. You know, there's in order to flourish in an environment that allows you to flourish, and like you said, that's an impact on you mentally. I mean, if you're coming into work everywhere, you're coming to a working environment where you don't feel safe, you don't feel comfortable, you feel disengaged, dislocated from the main area, then you're starting way back from the starting line straight away. So that's a massive impact. And just maybe to pick up on Simon's question, I think it's in terms of are these made available? They're probably not, and to the extent they need to be. And that's an education piece that needs to happen. I know Michael, and I still need to book him in for another one of my courses. We try and get Michael working now and delivering on the UEFA license internally, to send out some of those messages about that, you know, we're talking about the four corners, and we're just going to skate over them without actually focusing on probably the most important, which is the psychological, and then miss an opportunity for Michael to come deliver. Then we've missed a trick somewhere. So that's an education piece, and it's a massive part of the jigsaw. So hopefully that, and again, it's all to do with making people feel safe to flourish. Yeah,
I think what's important as well, if you know, is also when you start to think about the professional game and the grassroots game, and we talk about the two qualifications, and we talk about the UEFA, they look completely different. You know, the way that they are, the way that, and when I say it's completely different, I'm not necessarily about the content. I mean the way that the participants engage with the award. It's quite different. So if you think, if I've come through a system for a grassroots club, and I've been the best, say, coach in my grassroots club, but I only ever worked in my grassroots club, and I get into that youth UEFA space, that's a big, it's that moment where you think, oh my God, I didn't realize how much I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the work that, you know, that we need to do with Black and Asian coaches within their own clubs, and giving them that support to understand what they're going to go into. And I think maybe, I don't know, and again, I don't know what it's like to be in a professional B license. And maybe that's some work that the PFA and the FA and Coach Edu, we can come together and say, well, actually, this is what happens on a B license in the program. This is what happens on a B license in the grassroots game, and see what similarities there are, and see what things we can we can say, well, actually, here are some of the pinch points around mental health that we can start to tackle together. Because, you know, as Black coaches, we all face the same pressures, but just in different ways. And the strategies that we all use to cope, maybe we could share those strategies to help us to if you like, push ourselves forward into those spaces that we can't normally access.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea there, Pete. Just the last 5 minutes for anyone else who wants to ask any questions. What I would say from my experience and having started my coaching badges many years ago, the culture of the courses themselves is very different. So it's almost in the past, it used to be set up in order for you to fail. It was quite an intimidating thing. Senior pros and well-known professionals and internationals were given, I wouldn't say a bit of an easy time, but it felt like the coach educator leant towards them and addressed them in the classrooms, and they'd always pop up on their shoulders. And the ones who weren't quite at that stratospheric level were kind of hanging around, and maybe had to earn our stripes a bit more. I think there's a better way of doing now. We do offer support. It was not stop. You'll be familiar with that mantra, Pete. Stop, stand still, fail, next. You know, that's changed massively now. And that used, I mean, the very fact I'm bringing it up means that it's still seared in my memory. But that has changed now. It's a one-to-one support with candidates. The idea is to support them through their journey into the next level. So you don't actually ever fail them. You just support them until they're ready to move on, which I think has got to be a better way of doing it. But you wonder about how many coaches lost previously with the other regime, I think so. And I think certainly from a black perspective, that was just another limit. That was just another layer on top, another barrier of intimidation. And I use that word with a small, very much a small I, but it was intimidation, not designed to be, but that's what it meant. It ended up being, I think, and a real barrier for coaches. Just down to the last couple of minutes. We've still got 10 participants on, so they've all been very quiet. This is the point where you start picking on people, but I won't do that. I promise you I won't do that. But there are, like I say, we've got a couple of minutes. I'm hoping that we might just get at least one more question in from someone in the group before we wrap up. I'm sure there must be a variety of questions, whether it's medical, whether it's COVID. I think Gary's session on COVID and those continuing challenges for me was really interesting, and that how that worked with mental health and the grassroots game, the pro game. And just give everyone a couple more minutes to. There's no such thing as a daft question, people. Anything you want to throw in would be much appreciated for now. What are the big challenges for you then, Peter? If you were saying, if I was your boss now at the FA and I was giving you some KPIs, for example, what would be the 2 or 3 KPIs for Peter in his role in the next year or two?
I think the big ones for me would be how do we get more Black and Asian coaches into the system and to be successful within the system? How do we ensure that when they're in the system, again, I go back to that word safety, they feel safe. And for me, the next one is just who are the high flyers, who are the next generation of coach educators, and who and coaches who will go into the game maybe at non-league level or even find their way into the professional ranks. I think I don't know if there's a frustration on my part. I think it's more to do with the fact I think that there's a lot of talent out there, a lot of talent, more talent than there's ever been, and there's more support than there's ever been, but still not enough. There are not enough Ifes, Michaels, Peters, Collins out there to support Black and Asian coaches, and I think there's a training need, I think, for some of our white colleagues to understand how some of their behaviours may affect coaches who go on their courses, and some of those things are not often deliberate. It's just because they never have to think about it. And I think, especially around Colin put a question about Asian coaches, and I think by understanding culture, that's the big thing. You must understand culture. That's for all of us, because if we don't, how are we going to interact with the people who come on our courses? And I think not being frightened to talk about the culture and ask people about their culture and have those proper conversations, then we can do that via things like webinars or one-to-ones, whatever. We have to have those proper conversations and not be frightened of it. And if we do that, then what happens is, as a white coach, you're better able to go into a room if say, for example, it's filled in an inner city London area.
Yeah.
But also, we must also remember that there are some white coaches who are very well equipped to work in a city diverse areas, and we mustn't forget that. We mustn't think that all white coaches are, they don't understand.
Yeah.
There are white coaches who do understand culture.
Yeah.
So it's working with those white coaches to help them to educate some white coaches that they know, and even some black coaches who they know, to understand that we're living in a very culturally diverse society, and we've got to understand that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. I'm going to ask Michael the same question just to wrap up. I think Gary's just left us. So just in a moment, Mike, just think about a couple of maybe two or three standout challenges for you moving forward. But before we do that, just thank Simon because he's leaving us. But thank you for your question early on. And Rebecca's made a great point from an HR. She's not a football person, but she said needing to feel safe in the system is massive, and that concept of belonging. Because I guess it's that feeling of not being an outsider. There's nothing worse. You feel on the fringes of things. And she says it's not about. And she says it's not about. She doesn't know much about football, but I don't think that makes a difference. Rebecca, I really appreciate the point you make. It's whether it's with an HR perspective or a D&I perspective, that feeling of need to be belonged and supported is massive. So thanks for that. Thanks for that. From your contribution. Yeah, Michael, I think Gary's left us, so it might just be the last word from you before we wrap it up.
I think a bit like what Pete said, really. I think, it's a case of, education is going to be key for me. I think the big thing for me is that, is educating coaches and managers at clubs, because we unfortunately still have a number of old school managers, old school coaches, that still don't understand the kind of mental health agenda. And we can also add like physios into that as well, because some physios, have that mindset of, just physical injury, but not sure how to deal with an emotional injury. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just about being able to pass on or refer that particular individual onto the relevant person. The other thing about it is club staff as well, is being careful about club staff that when they do come into contact with an individual with a mental health well-being issue, that they know their parameters and don't try and hold on to that individual, but pass that individual on to the relevant people, relevant person. Also, I think what I'm finding is that the numbers of members using the service are predominantly white individuals using the service. And my question is, why isn't the Black and Asian or ethnic minorities using the service? That's a bit of research that I'm going to do myself, because I think there's something going on there that maybe culturally that they, that causes them not to kind of access a service, or is their perception. And I notice if that when I go and speak to a player or do an assessment on a player, my name's Michael Bennett, you can't tell if I'm black or white. The way I talk, you can't tell if I'm black or white. So, when I go to meet him and I walk in and say, hi, nice to meet you, Michael Bennett, you can see the facials that completely change, and I'm used to it. Like, and as you know, if I'm a man who I wear my ripped up jeans and trainers and my denim jacket and stuff, so that's the way I am. Like, you know what I mean? So, I think those perceptions we kind of need to change as well. Like, do you know what I mean? Because I think the perception is that, these therapists are all middle-aged, shirt tie wearing, suit wearing, clipboard holding individuals. Like, do you know what I mean? That isn't the case. We just had a cohort of PFA members that come through last year, 7 of them, former players, 6 of them are black. So I think if we can kind of make the kind of therapeutic support more cultural, diverse, and people can see that, then I'm hoping that, this will encourage, our BAME individuals, football-wise, former and current, to come forward. So that will be my KPI, mate.
Brilliant. And what a good place to stop. And apologies for those thank you for those who stayed with us. We've just gone past 7:30. Big thank you to Gary. I know he was during the clinic, so he's multitasking. So thank you for him. I think he's left for the time being. Big thank you to Peter. Well, congratulations on the role, Peter. Hope you keep doing all your good work. Michael, I know, does a load of great work, so keep up the good work. And Colin, somewhere in the background, I know putting all this together was a big initiative for you, so well done. And thank you all for listening. Stay safe, everyone, in your various environments. I think that COVID warning from Gary was particularly pertinent, that we've got a long way to go on that. So stay safe. Thank you for listening tonight, and all the best.